I've never seen anything like it in my life. I'm still in shock. It's almost as if the airline didn't even know who they were dealing with. This wasn't some random traveler with a chip on their shoulder. It wasn't a confused tourist in a suit too big for them. This was Kira Matthews, a 17-year-old high school senior with a mind sharper than most executives and a vision that could make any company rethink their strategies. It was supposed to be just another flight, a brief escape for Kira, leaving the noise of business behind for a few hours. A flight from New York to California, nothing out of the ordinary. But what happened on board would change not just Kira's life, but also the lives of the people who thought they knew how the world worked. As Kira stepped onto the plane, the flight attendants glanced over her as they checked her ticket. Their eyes flickered quickly to her sneakers, her hoodie, then back to her boarding pass, almost like they were making assumptions, and for a brief moment those assumptions were enough. No one expected her to be sitting in first class. She was 17, yes, and maybe her attire didn't scream luxury. But she had done everything right. She had the ticket, she had the seat, she even had the money, but this wasn't about that. This was about something else entirely. "Sorry, miss, you're in the wrong seat." The flight attendant's voice was sharp as she approached Kira, her gaze immediately flicking over to the plush seats around the plane as if it were impossible for someone like her to belong. Kira barely looked up. There was no need for her to defend herself. She didn't have to explain that she didn't just belong there. She owned this flight. The words hung in the air for a beat, and that was all it took for Kira to shift gears. This wasn't just about her seat on the plane anymore. As the flight attendant's eyes narrowed, Kira reached into her pocket, pulling out a piece of paper, and that's when it all came crashing down. With a smirk, Kira handed the attendant her ticket and waited. The flight attendant took it, her expression still condescending, unsure if this was some kind of joke, and then came the bombshell. Kira wasn't just another passenger. She wasn't just a high school senior out for a casual flight. Kira Matthews had just bought the airline. As the flight attendant scanned the ticket, her face went from one of smug confidence to total confusion. The words on the paper didn't seem to register. She glanced back up at Kira, her posture stiffening. "I don't understand, miss. This is a first-class seat. Are you sure this is yours?" Kira didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, relaxed but with a quiet, controlled intensity that spoke volumes. She knew exactly what was coming. She knew she had to let it all unfold. This wasn't a misunderstanding, and it wasn't just an issue of a misprinted ticket. No, this was personal. Kira's gaze shifted, briefly meeting the eyes of the other passengers who were now starting to notice the exchange. Their whispers began to rise, low at first, then louder as they began to make their own judgments. What were they thinking? Who's this girl, and why is she in the first-class cabin? Kira couldn't care less about the whispers or the stares. She had been dealing with people questioning her for her entire life, doubting her intelligence, doubting her abilities, doubting her right to be where she was. What the flight attendant didn't know, what no one knew, was that Kira Matthews wasn't some random teen looking to live out a fantasy. She wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just someone buying their way into a seat. She was someone who understood the value of everything, especially what it meant to own your space, to challenge systems, and to take control of your destiny. The flight attendant's hand shook slightly as she held up the ticket, still processing the information. She was trying to understand how it was possible, trying to make sense of what was happening. Kira didn't wait for her to ask again. "You can check the ticket, but the answer won't change." Kira's voice was calm, measured, but carrying an undeniable weight. She could have explained that her father, Jay Matthews, wasn't just any businessman. Jay Matthews was the CEO of Golden Sky Airlines, the very airline they were flying with. She could have dropped that name. She could have let the attendants in on the fact that the CEO's daughter wasn't someone to be messed with. But she didn't. Instead, Kira pulled out her phone. A simple tap, a few seconds. And the world as they knew it was about to change. The moment Kira's fingers tapped the screen, she didn't need to say another word. Her phone buzzed lightly in her hand. An instant reply. A message from her father, Jay Matthews. "Don't worry, Kira. I've got this. Just relax. I'll take care of everything." Kira's lips twitched into a small, knowing smile. The connection she had with her father was unshakable. She knew he had the power to resolve this situation without breaking a sweat. This wasn't a mere request for an upgrade or a seat change. This was a test, and J. Matthews never lost. With the phone still in her hand, Kira stood up, pushing past the flight attendant, who was now visibly uncomfortable. She moved through the narrow aisle of the aircraft, the hum of nervous whispers following her every step. Passengers exchanged glances, trying to piece together what had just transpired. Was she really the daughter of the airline's CEO? Could that be true? It seemed like an absurd coincidence, but as Kira moved to the front of the plane, the silence grew. It was clear now. Something was off. "Excuse me, miss," the flight attendant called, her voice shaking with uncertainty. But Kira didn't stop. She knew what she was about to do wasn't just about reclaiming her seat. It was about reclaiming her right to stand tall, to be seen as someone worthy of respect, without apology. She arrived at the front of the plane where the crew stood. One glance was all it took. Kira's father had been in the air before. She had seen him take control of entire boardrooms with nothing more than a few words and an unwavering stare. And now, she was about to demonstrate that his influence stretched far beyond just the business world. "I need to speak to the captain," she said simply. The flight attendants exchanged glances, the unease in the air palpable. They knew that the CEO's daughter, no matter how young, was someone they couldn't ignore. The flight attendant hesitated for a moment, glancing nervously at her colleagues. Kira stood her ground, her posture straight, her eyes unwavering. Finally, the attendant nodded, her face flushed. "All right, I'll get the captain," she muttered, turning quickly to head toward the cockpit. Kira watched her go, her fingers gripping the armrests of the nearest seat as the hum of the airplane seemed to grow louder in her ears. In the distance, the faint sound of murmurs from the other passengers swirled around her. She knew what they were thinking. Who does she think she is? Is she really the daughter of the CEO? Should we do something? Should we say something? But none of them dared. Not a single person dared to step in, and why would they? They had no idea what kind of firestorm was about to hit. Kira's phone buzzed again. This time, an email notification. It was a message from her father. The subject line read, "Prepare for impact." With a smirk, she unlocked her phone and opened the message. Inside, a single sentence. "I just made a call to the top." "You're good. Stay calm." Kira's heart beat a little faster. Her father, J. Matthews, wasn't just the CEO of one of the world's biggest airlines. He had connections with the highest levels of government, the FAA, and several key figures in the aviation industry. He was known for handling things like this swiftly, with precision. It wasn't just about proving a point, it was about righting an injustice. And Kira had seen her father take on much bigger challenges. This was small potatoes. She took a deep breath and locked her phone, tucking it back into her pocket. A few moments later, the flight attendant returned, her expression more serious than ever. "The captain is ready to speak with you," she said. Kira nodded, calmly following her toward the cockpit, where a tall, middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform stood, waiting. He didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, he was almost expectant. "Ms. Matthews?" the captain said, extending his hand, a polite, almost knowing smile crossing his face. "I understand you need assistance." Kira shook his hand firmly, her eyes locked with his. "You could say that." The captain motioned for Kira to sit in the seat opposite him, his tone still calm but now carrying an air of respect. As she sat down, the door to the cockpit was shut firmly behind her, shutting out the hum of the passengers and the noise of the plane. "Ms. Matthews, I've been briefed on your situation," the captain began, his voice steady. "I'll be honest, I'm not sure what exactly is going on here, but I trust that you've got a valid reason for being in first class." Kira nodded, her expression calm but her mind sharp. "I do, and it's not just about me." The captain raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "I'm listening." Kira leaned back in her seat, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest as she gathered her thoughts. "I purchased this ticket along with the entire flight as part of an initiative I've been overseeing." She let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting their weight settle before continuing. I bought this airline. I'm now the majority shareholder and one of its key decision makers. This plane, the entire fleet actually, is part of my responsibility now. The captain blinked, his expression flickering between surprise and disbelief. You're kidding, he said, his tone more neutral now, though it was clear he was processing the information in real time. Kira smiled slightly. I assure you I'm not. She reached into her bag, pulling out a document on her tablet and showing him the official transaction details, signed contracts, and her name stamped on the ownership papers. I've made my investments for change, for progress, for a better future. And this treatment I'm receiving now, it's not the kind of future I'm going to accept. The captain took the tablet from her hand, scrolling through the documents with furrowed brows. He took his time, thoroughly checking the legalities that Kira had presented him. As he did, the silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement of the power dynamics at play, and the fact that they were about to shift dramatically. When he finally set the tablet down, he met Kira's gaze again. I don't know how this slipped through the cracks, but I'll take full responsibility for the situation on board. Let me make a call to our corporate headquarters. Do that, Kira replied. Her voice was calm, but her words carried an underlying sense of finality. And while you're at it, I think it's time for a few people to understand what it means to respect the passengers they serve. The captain nodded, standing up and stepping out of the cockpit to make the call. Kira sat there alone now, but feeling a strange sense of power. The events unfolding around her were not just about a small injustice. They were about a larger, much more important shift. In that moment, she realized the far-reaching implications of her actions. It wasn't just a personal matter. It was about proving to the world that things didn't need to stay the same. As she waited for the captain to return, Kira thought back to her father's words. Prepare for impact. And with that one phone call, she knew everything was about to change. The door to the cockpit swung open and the captain stepped back into the cabin. His expression had changed, no longer uncertain or merely professional, but now filled with a new kind of resolve. Ms. Matthews, he said, his voice steady but charged with an urgency that hadn't been there before. I've made the call, corporate's on it. They're contacting the ground staff and issuing a full investigation. Kira's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. Good, it's about time. The captain hesitated before continuing. I've been instructed to offer my deepest apologies for the misunderstanding, and, if you're willing, to make sure the rest of your flight is as comfortable as possible. Kira stood up, now fully confident, her gaze piercing. I appreciate the apology, but what matters more is that this never happens again, to anyone. The captain nodded, finally seeing the depth of Kira's mission. This was not about a personal grievance, but about bringing about change. As Kira walked back toward her seat in first class, she could feel the eyes of the other passengers following her every step. The murmur of whispered conversations had risen, and even Sandra, the head flight attendant, couldn't hide the shock in her eyes as Kira made her way down the aisle. It was clear that this wasn't just some minor inconvenience to be swept under the rug. This was a shift, a paradigm change that couldn't be ignored. Kira sat back down in her seat, her spine straight, and her hands folded in her lap. She allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. She knew that the real work had only just begun. It wasn't about winning this small battle, it was about transforming an entire system. From behind her, she could hear the hushed voices of passengers continuing to gossip. Some sounded curious, others incredulous, and a few even sounded admiring. It didn't matter. She had already won. Just moments later, the captain returned, standing in the aisle with a sudden change in demeanor. Ms. Matthews, he said, his voice now carrying an air of respect. We've been cleared for takeoff, but I want you to know, this entire crew stands with you. We'll make sure this flight is as smooth as possible. Kira looked up, her expression softening just a little. Thank you, but just remember, change isn't just about making sure one person gets treated right. It's about ensuring that everyone who walks on board this plane feels like they belong here. The captain paused for a moment before nodding again. His voice lowered to a near whisper. I get it, and that's something we'll work on. Kira nodded. Good. As the engines hummed to life and the plane began to taxi down the runway, Kira's thoughts were already ahead. This moment was just the beginning of something larger, something that stretched far beyond this one flight or the actions of a single flight attendant. This was about breaking down barriers, and barriers built on assumptions and stereotypes that had existed far too long. And now, with this flight, those walls were starting to crack. As the plane ascended into the sky, Kira let her thoughts wander to the future. She would fight for a world where no one, regardless of their race or background, would ever have to face such indignities again. She looked out the window, watching the city below shrink into the distance, and allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. There was a new day ahead, and it was one where people like her, people who weren't afraid to stand up, speak out, and claim their place, would begin to reshape the world. And she was just getting started. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Drop a comment below to let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. Stay tuned for more incredible stories.